Oh, I didn't fix the music. I'll get that fixed. Hey, dude, how's it going?
Hey man, how you doing?
I literally okay. Before we intro, your video's looking amazing. By the way, I don't know what happened.
Oh, awesome.
Your
I
video
know
looks
exactly
fantastic.
what happened. I know exactly what
Okay,
happened. I solved it right before the show, and I
dude.
will reveal this mystery.
Right after this.
But yeah, right after this.
um, I fixed I got here early and I fixed all the things that I had to fix from iCloud, just a bunch of stuff. And the one thing that I missed was in the transition. We had a song before that was like a and I don't have that music in. I don't know where the music went, but I think it was from the old music service we were using. And
Mm.
one of our earlier videos got tagged on YouTube because it has copyrighted material in it,
Ah,
which is basically it's fine. It's just basically saying that Epidemic Sound laid claim to one of your videos because you didn't give them credit, and or basically because I'm not paying the service fee anymore because I canceled it and I went to a free music service. But it tagged one video. I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. So I was trying to fix it for this, but I missed one of our transitions. I missed getting music on, but that's okay. It's fine.
yeah, that happens. It
It's fine.
happens. But I will say that I'm excited to be here. It's Friday on Thursday night. It's always a lot of fun to be on the show and to be able to talk about Star Wars. But I will tell you about the mystery.
Do tell.
So for anybody that's watching this, and I think we might cost ourselves a sponsorship of this one. Um, uh, so I've been having video problems like legitimately from the last half hour. Like I could not figure out what my video problems were. And if you were watching the pre-show, you might have even seen me get up and walk away from my desk and around, and that was because I figured it out in that moment. And that's typically because I was like, I've got this fiber line. I've got this amazing mesh network. I mean, we work for a networking company, Jeff and I. So I'm sitting here thinking, there's something new that's on the network that is just a drain, that is just pulling me down. And then I got a nice little notification in the background that went, your Amazon delivery has just arrived. And I realized it was the Echo that I recently plugged in. That's not far from my desk. And then once I unplugged that, not
Magically,
4K
all the
definition,
things are
but
working.
magically all my problems are solved. So I would just say this, Jeff Bezos. Maybe you don't, maybe that thing doesn't need to listen to me all the time. So that could be the solution here.
It could
But
be like
yeah, that it was the Echo.
that's wild. That is, I've
Yeah.
never had that happen before, but I have had well, this has happened a few times where I'm going on a call. It's not usually video because my video it's an external camera, and for mine it either works or it doesn't. So I rarely get any I don't know, bad quality out of it. What usually I get is my dang microphone because for some reason when I
Oh.
disconnect the USB-C cable and move it to another computer and move it back, all the things on my computer decide, oh, you didn't mean this microphone, did you? You meant the onboard microphone for your Mac Mini, which makes sense. Or it's like, oh, you mean the WebEx audio codec that's part of WebEx messaging, right? And I'm like, why would I? Why would that be? What? like, my computer for Mac, for some reason, the Mac OS. I love my Mac to death, but for some
Yeah.
reason, it decides sometimes that the big external mic that you plugged in that is obviously a mic is like, no, we're not going to default to that. How about your camera? We'll make your camera your microphone, right? I'm like, okay.
Well, I will tell you, and I just think this is funny, but I have spent. We could do a show, and we're gonna get to this show.
We will.
We could do a show on just the amount of things that I'm sure you and I have learned in COVID about how to optimize for our network. And
Mm-hmm.
one of and even like producing a show like this, like on my very first episode, I used my MacBook webcam. I used I think the mic that I used was just like the mic that was like in the webcam or something, like in the Mac. And then over the course of a couple of episodes, I've learned, I need to use a real mic. I need to have a better web camera. I need to have these things so that way your sound doesn't bounce off my rooms and create off my walls and create an echo. But in COVID, one of the things that I learned was how to segment my network. and basically create a separate network that I'm running off of, that all the stuff in my office is running off of. And then another part of the network supports all my kids, of which I have several, that are all, we're going to online school. These were all fun skills to learn. And I wonder if people are still doing stuff like that, still trying to find ways to optimize their network. Because I know a lot of people are still working from home.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I lucked out. It lucked out for me simply because I built this shed, so I'm in the backyard. So I actually have from our work, I have a Meraki stack back here that is my own wireless, a switch and wireless. So just feeding the shed and the stuff that's in here. So kind of like what you've done, like so segmented but more physical segment. I got lucky. I know we've turned before we get into Star Wars talk tonight. We're in networking talk.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll get to it. It's up here.
I put in the and other stuff. So and
other stuff. This is the other stuff. It just happens we're leading with that.
You're gonna have to bear with us tonight. It's been a long week for the two of us, and
it has been a look. Everybody, it's been a long week.
It was a long week today, so we're just gonna have to let's just go. Just give us a minute on our soapboxes, and we'll get into the Star Wars hotness in a few minutes.
Exactly.
So our cable, the cable modem is in our master bedroom, and when I had the shed built, when I built the shed, I had the concrete pad poured. I asked the contractors who were landscaping the yard, I'm like, well, you've already got the yard dug up, which is why I was able to do this. It was not because I just contract someone to rip my yard apart to give me internet out here. But they had torn everything out of the backyard to do our landscaping. All the trenching was being done for the sprinkler system and drainage. And I'm like, hey, since you're there, would it be hard before you build the outdoor kitchen? Would it be hard there's an outlet already there. Could you just drop a conduit in the ground and pull the power cable, like an extension of power cable over? And they're like, yeah, we can totally do that. I'm like, since you're there too, could you possibly do a separate conduit next to that I can run a Cat 5 cable through? And they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. They're like, the trench is basically dug anyway. We'll just do that. So they dropped two electrical conduits in the ground, just little half-inch conduits, nothing big. Just dropped in, came over. They pop up actually literally right behind that air conditioning unit, right. I don't know how to move my hand, right there. And they come up and it's just two tubes coming out of the ground. So I was able to actually run a Cat 5 directly into my shed, into that box. And then unfortunately the router I got only had one port. And I was like, crap. I needed a special router for Comcast and all that jazz. But thankfully I did have a Meraki MX, which is the firewall, multi-port. So I got to plug both of my home networks into this firewall to the internet. So literally this is on its own direct connection into the internet. So, and my Mac Mini that I'm on is hardwired into that. So I never have to worry about wireless and whatever else when at least I'm on this computer. It's super helpful. And I don't remember why I'm telling you this story, but yeah, that's what I I have a mesh in the house. I do have an Eero mesh in the house, and that's actually pretty good. I really enjoy that.
It's because really, this has everything to do with astrometric droids and power converters.
It does.
And the Tachi station. But I will say that I feel like if you're into Star Wars, it's not as much with Star Trek. I feel like Star Trek, you really get into this. Because Star Trek is like a world of fake technologies, like Heisenberg compensators and phase discriminators, and I'm not joking around. I could do this all day. I really can. I can talk to you about the parts of a phaser, and how antimatter reaction chambers work. But the
dilithium crystals are doing some stuff. I don't know. That's
exactly.
a word I know.
Yeah.
See, I know one.
You gotta be
I know
careful.
a word.
You want
or phrase.
You don't. Yeah, you don't want to be careful, especially when you're going through recrystallization.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, come on. But I feel like if you're into a certain amount of science fiction, you kind of naturally have a tendency to be really interested in technology, and I don't know if that's universal, but I feel like you can be some type of and I'm going to use this to be general, like a gearhead. And that could be machinery gear. It can be technology gear. It could be the thing that you saw in science fiction that inspired you and said, I want that. It could be the
Mm-hmm.
hoverboard from Back to the Future. But regardless, or auto lacing from Back to the Future. It could be so many different things. But I feel like that's why I've enjoyed being in the networking world. And also have a lot of friends that simultaneously love technology and are also big fans of Star Wars or Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or name your poison. They're there.
Fun fact, I agree with you completely on that. Fun
Mhm.
fact, if you want auto lacing in your shoes, you can go buy the Nike Air Max that came out several years ago, designed by Tinker Hatfield, specifically to be the they built they got a working replica, full replica of the Back to the Future shoes. They call it, and it was the basis for what they ended up calling the Nike Air Max, I believe. I'll double check. And they gave them. There's a video out there. They actually gave them to Michael J. Fox a few years back, and he put them
Well,
on.
that's awesome.
They go and they shrink. He's like, oh my god, that's awesome. And then they made a shoe off of them, I believe, called the I think it's called the Nike Air Max. I'm not positive, but they did make a shoe off of them with their auto lacing technology. And Tinker Hatfield, who's the lead designer on the Air Jordans for like 20 Air Jordans, like he is the man when it comes to like those shoes. He recreated the Nike Air Jordan brand. Like Michael Jordan was going to walk away from Nike. Like he was literally on a golf course.
Wow.
People convinced him to leave Nike. Was going to a meeting with Nike. His parents there, everything, but he shows up like 4.5 hours late. Tinker Hatfield blows his socks off with like this new design, and they form a relationship for the next 20 something years of like, or 20 something shoes of these things. Yeah, so they designed it. There's a whole, you can actually see it. There's a documentary, there's a show on Netflix called
Oh, wow.
Abstract. And one of the
Wow.
episodes is on Tinker Hatfield, and they tell this entire story. And yeah, they literally show the event like in New York where they displayed the new auto lacing shoes that they came up with, and they did it specifically to fit for athletes. He's like, especially basketball players who move a lot and need the shoes to be super duper tight on their feet when they play.
Yep.
But the moment you're standing still, like, they need some rest. Like the feet are getting destroyed. Loosen up those laces a little bit so the feet can kind of get some blood circulation. Then when they start to move, tighten them back down again. Like it's a real thing you can buy.
Oh my
But
god.
the Back to the Future shoes, you can. I don't know how many they made if they're still available. You could buy them $50,000, but you could buy them.
Well, I have a new life goal. There was, I got the house. I guess the next thing people want a boat, but you know what? I have heard one universal truth about boats, which is the happiest day of a boat owner's life is the day that they buy their boat and the day that they sell their boat. And I think that I am going to put my money into these shoes
See,
because
there
I'll
you
tell
go.
you right now, man, I was a huge Back to the Future fan, and I'm like wearing a shirt that says 1981. I know that 1985 was the Back to the Future year, but I just for the exact same reasons, like Star Wars, Back to the Future. I loved all of it. I love and even Star Trek. Like I like the idea of something that just like creates or inspires like amazing technologies.
Yeah.
Like I've always, and of course, like I've always been one who's like, I can't wait to get to space. I if they had that, like, hey, we're gonna go to Mars, we gotta colonize there, I'd be like, sign me and my family up. Like I'm off to the new world. But yeah, I love technology. I love ideas of what technology can
Mm-hmm.
be, and I think that's one of the things that really, like, I don't know, I find great about Star Wars. And I will say I'll add in Star Trek to that. Where Star Wars does all of this world building. I even like things like, oh, the droids. Like the droids are one of my favorite parts of Star Wars because they look so functional.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about robots, they look more like the Mars rover, and we're building them more like the Mars rover than we are like Data from Star Trek. They're going to look more like R2D2. Even like a Roomba vacuum, or like any of these little robots that we create,
Mouse droid.
drones.
A mouse droid.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Mouse droid.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at that kind of stuff and I just think that, there was something to that world building where they were already anticipating kind of what technology would be, which is sometimes it's not going to be form, it's going to be function.
You know,
and astrometric droids look like that.
absolutely. And I think it's so interesting. I think this is like an entire other show too. Is
Oh wow,
I mean,
totally.
because the droids are encompassed in this, but it's that, like you said, it's a function over form, and it's
Yep.
something I realized recently that I absolutely love about Star Wars in relation to a lot of other sci-fi. Like, there's a lot of other sci-fi I love that's futuristic sci-fi. And I've actually watched a few episodes in the last month of Star Trek Next Generation, just a couple of them post beard, after the beard.
After the beard.
After the beard.
You got to go after the
After
beard.
the beard.
Yeah.
So I watched a couple episodes, and the thing that I realized, it's like no dig on Star Trek. If that's your jam, that's your jam. And it is entertaining, and I'm enjoying it. But the thing I'm finding that I actually really love about Star Wars, I've said it before, is like that it's gritty and sort of like down, something to that effect. But what I realize is it's not so much that, because it's not always gritty. It's what it dawned on me is that the tech in Star Wars isn't futuristic. It's just the tech that exists in the galaxy. So you see them, everyone in these movies and TV shows interact with the tech around them, but it's just a part, because even like if you watch, especially the animated series, you watch any of the animated series, Rebels is a good example of this. So many people live on these planets and the buildings look high tech, the interfaces, the computers, they all work, but they're like an agrarian society. Like they grow crops and stuff and they sell it at a market every weekend. And your first thought is like, wait, hold on a sec. If you're a high tech society, why aren't you like, Wakanda and like you're flying supercars and hypercars? Like, well, it's like, I love that about it because it makes you realize that these sentient beings, humans and other creatures that are sentient, that live around each other, whatever else, they're just beings, and different planets are different ways, and different, closer to the core you get, there's more tech. You look at Coruscant, and of course there's more tech. But even on a planet like Coruscant, where it is basically one big city, the tech isn't part of their life. It's just the thing that happens to be around. It grew up around them, but they're still just people. They're not doing like super futuristic high tech things. They get on a car, like a taxi that takes them someplace, that goes and does something. There's nothing from them perspective. There's nothing else to it. It's just, I got on a taxi and it took me someplace. And there's a droid that drives the taxi, and it's very like Fifth Element, but with a droid in the front seat sort of thing. Or like that would be more like what is the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger? Why am I blanking on that?
Oh, Blade. No, I'm sorry, not Blade Runner. It's Total Recall.
Total Recall, like Total
With
Recall.
The Johnny Cab.
Yeah,
Johnny
the Johnny Cab.
Yeah.
It's like that, where it's an automation where you get into a cab and there's a robot that they just put a face to it, so it feels a little more human, but it's just a robot driving you someplace in a car. And I love that because it makes me feel more attracted to that, or like emotionally attracted to that, because I'm like, I can see our society in that, because it feels more like what's more likely to happen, like us evolving into a society that has super high tech and everything's fine and there's no money and everybody's good, we all strive. That's a lovely idea, and yeah, I mean, that would be amazing. But it's almost like thinking about like the Matrix, where they made so many different Matrix, and every time they tried, they were utopias and all this, and humans never ever grabbed onto it until they finally made one that was like almost crappy for everybody, and humor's like, okay, this feels more real. Now my mind can actually accept this and live with it. It's that sort of, to me, it's like, I don't know that humans could actually accept the type of world that Star Trek or at least Next Generation time period tends to portray, of like, oh, there's no money and we don't strive for such things and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, cool, but I don't know if people now could really ever get there, because that's just, I don't know. It's fascinating to think about. It really is.
So Jeff, you have hit on something that is a so this is why I actually like Star Trek. And it's actually really great commentary on our lives today. By the way, like, I think that the world you're talking about is the lived-in world of Star Wars, which is that technology is just everywhere, and you just use it whenever you need to use it. And oh hey, like, you lost an arm, don't worry, we got this doctor here. He's gonna put a robot arm on you. Like that all sounds, yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, put you some Bacta, you're gonna be just fine. But one of the things that I actually really like about Star Trek, because and it's funny too, because even in the lived-in world of Star Wars, all of the sound design is very organic.
Yes.
Even the blaster sounds, or the wrench against the beam, or the cable, the sounds, or there's sounds that we know. When the Millennium Falcon breaks down, that's the sound of a one of the propeller planes starting up. It's the boom 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 boom. That sound is from a real thing that we have in our real life. Star Trek sounds are incredibly like invented
Synthetic.
because they're
Yeah.
for yes, exactly, because they're technologies that are never around. And one of the other things too is that Star Trek has a lot of ambient sounds,
Mm.
which in our regular lives would drive us nuts. If we were like in our office place and we kept hearing, it's just like, oh my gosh, like shut that off. But this is one of the things I do like about Star Trek is, and all you have to do is look at one invention, just one, and apply it to what we are as humanity now and what we could be. And this is the thing that I always thought was cool about Star Trek, is that Star Trek is working from a perspective of an ideal human race that has empathy and technology. And oftentimes in our society, technology replaces empathy. And
True.
so
Yeah.
like a real good example is the replicator. If you created replicators now, it would be commoditized. It would be something that only the super rich would have. And
True.
even though it could solve all of our food problems and hunger and poverty and want, it would eliminate want. You just replicate what you want. We would commoditize it, and there would be, oh well, you could only get this package of replication if you pay this amount of money right now. And so replicators even now wouldn't solve our problems. But if we were able to have our technology and have empathy, which is kind of the future that Star Trek is proposing, that's actually pretty awesome.
Oh yeah.
And I kind of like that as a point in the distance, which is
A point to
that
strive
we
for.
could yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
I
that we
like
could
that.
somehow have both.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's interesting. had never thought about it like that. They're not, they aren't dissimilar from each other. They are just showing, they're showing almost like by the way, I'm loving the What If series by Marvel. It's making me think
Oh
of
yeah.
it's making me think of that. It's like almost a what if. Like these are both, they're two different story times, two different sets of world building, etc. It's basically their own. If we think about it from that context, they're almost its own what if thing. What
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
humanity just continued the way it's going and tech builds up, whatever else? Very likely we'll end up with something like a Star Wars sort of thing. What would
Hmm.
we actually like it to be? And to your point, like if you can focus on empathy and minimizing want or eliminating want entirely, you end up at more in a place that's along the lines of what Star Trek has, and you all this room for possibility. And that we have these starships that, while they can defend themselves and they have weapons, are designed to be science vessels to go research and explore new life and new worlds and new civilizations. Like that's their entire like mantra is that's what we set out to. We'll protect ourselves, but that's what we're out there to do. We're not just like transporting the stuff because now we're in space. It's like, no, we're here for a purpose, as opposed to I need to get to another planet because I can't trade on my own planet anymore, so I'll trade on your planet instead. Like, which is almost kind of what Star Wars in some places, what it's kind of talking about. Like that's the other part. The neighborhood is just expanded to this galaxy rather than the neighborhood of your own planet. Whereas Star Trek, I found that interesting before, that in Star Trek you don't see as much world building as you would see in Star Wars.
Oh
I'm not,
yeah. Oh
I'm not
yeah.
saying in a bad way, but like it's the other planets and races you encounter. They're not just hopping from planet to planet and encountering a new civilization every single time. Like, oh, we're going to this other place and this other place. It's like so much of the galaxy seems like it's completely uncharted, not even touched, not even explored in any way, shape, or form. So like when things
Oh
happen,
yeah.
like Voyager ends up some halfway across the galaxy, it's like, oh, well, you're screwed. Sorry. Peace out. Maybe we'll see you.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll
Yeah.
see you again eventually. But in Star Wars, it's like, oh yeah, we can totally get there. It might take us 3 weeks to get there through hyperspace, but we can do it. We don't understand
Hmm.
how hyperspace works, which is another kind of key difference there too. Is like they still don't really understand how hyperspace actually works. They know that they can
Yeah.
create it and they can use it, but they still don't really get why that actually functions. Whereas in Star
Hmm.
Trek, very different. Like they totally get what it. Things happen that are aberrations to their knowledge, but it's not. It's much more of the exception in the story than it is. The rule is much more of like we got into warp and we just go faster in warp or slower in warp, and it's like it's a thing that we do. But
Yeah,
really,
I think no, no, I think this kind of actually gets us to the topic because one of the things that I always liked about Star Trek, and then one of my favorite characters, one of the things I love about Star Wars is it's a great it's a set of stories about being kind of a hero. Like again, like I think R2D2 is this amazingly heroic
Hmm.
character, and although again I know used for comic relief. 3PO also just a fun character, but I mean R2D2 is this great heroic character. Yoda's this great heroic character, and but one of the things that I liked about Star Wars and Star Trek is this blending of kind of this getting this balance of technology, and for Star Trek, it's very much a part of humanity has gotten to a point where we have equal amounts of empathy as we do technology. And so we are a better people because we're out to just better ourselves now. Like that's the whole point of
Hmm.
technology is to find ways to exchange and learn information in Star Trek. And in Star Wars, I feel like that is exemplified in the Jedi. Because the Jedi themselves are this odd mix of the organic and the technological in that they wear natural colors. They're wearing like browns and tans and sometimes greens, but they are very organically. They're very organic in their presentation. They're all about kind of living through the Force and being even with their environments, because the Force, which empowers them, is this force that obviously comes from all living things, and yet they carry around a piece of technology, the lightsaber, which is wonderfully technologically designed. They embrace things like hyperspace, and for some reason, the Force gives them an innate knowledge of how machinery works, and which is why Anakin can fix things, which is why Luke can fix things. They all have this natural ability to be able to do engineering, and it's almost intuitive, and and I feel like it's this mix that the Jedi have of ecology and technology,
Hmm.
and it's the Force. So yeah, I've always thought that that was really interesting. Like I always thought it was funny how it was like, yeah, Anakin saying I've always been good at fixing things, and that he just has this natural knowledge of how literally anything works. And or piloting, for example, that Luke's just a naturally great pilot because of the Force.
Hmm.
And these are all pieces of technology, not biology. So yeah, I like that balance that the Jedi seem to exemplify, which is technology as a tool, and possibly even an extension of biology. Literally, when Luke has a replacement arm that is a robot arm.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah.
That's I think this does really play nicely into what we were thinking about for tonight. I've been spending a lot, as my shirt says, I've been spending a lot of time with the High Republic content. I'm reading or listening to the latest book. One of the latest books that came out is an audio drama by Kevin Scott called Lorna
Mm.
D. And if for anyone who's gone through any of the High Republic stuff, this takes place a few hundred years before Skywalker and all that type of stuff. At the peak of the Jedi being awesome, like being good and right, and there's tons of them. There's Jedi temples all over the galaxy being established constantly. They're there for the
Mm.
good of people, the good of the Republic, and helping people out. Like that's literally what they're doing, and they're fantastic. The stories are really good, but of course there are or antagonists, and they're very different. The Sith are not part of this. Darksiders are not part of this. The dark side does exist, and it is being interwoven into some of the antagonists, but not as like a dark side user. Like I am a Sith or I'm a Dark Jedi. It's not that, which makes this more interesting in general. But getting back to the technology piece, um, you they've in this time period they have accepted that and embraced this technology and use it regularly as part of how the Jedi operate in space. So I have another shirt that it says like something like travel the outer rim or see the outer rim, and it's got a picture of a new ship on it that's called a Jedi Vector. It's actually it's a two-person, I think it's a two-person or a one-person ship for Jedi.
Hmm.
And the way they operate the ship is by taking their lightsaber and docking it on the dashboard, and that connection allows them and their force connection to basically run the ship. And only the Jedi whose vector it is can control that ship. So anybody else who gets on there, you would need that Jedi's lightsaber and that person's force connection with their own lightsaber docked in that way for the ship to operate. they're hyper, they're thin and light, and they have plenty of weapons, but they're thin and light, very nimble. They look almost like a wireframe version of like a TIE fighter, but like a TIE fighter, like almost crossed with a X-wing, but more wireframe and almost chintzy. But they're hyper maneuverable. Like thinking like Guardians of the Galaxy and the Nova Corps, they're ships that like almost move like on a grid, super fast sort of thing. They can do that because the Jedi are piloting them in part with the controls and in part with the Force. It can make these things do things that no other pilot could ever possibly do because the ships are even further beyond the description you gave of like Anakin's naturally good as a pilot, and Yoda and others like that, small nimble ships that they can foresee things with the Force. It's super interesting because in this time period they've embraced that, like they fully leverage that, and so when they have to battle these bad guys called the Nihil, these pirates, who are hyper erratic in their own regard, which make them even more dangerous and harder to fight, the Jedi are able to take them on really well because they can maneuver in ways that no other pilot ever could, not just because of their Force ability, but because they've completely embraced the Force utilization of the technology to do what they want to do, which is, it's wild. And it also gets back to what you and I were talking about with this topic, which is when you look at, I mean, Mace Windu's comment is key. I put that in the description that, I think we should inform the Senate that our ability to use the Force is diminished. That's the line he uses. And you and I had talked about this before, of like, what would have happened if that had been carried out? Or like, what if we learned more about that? Like, that they embrace, okay, it's diminished. What we should be doing as monks, essentially, is embracing that and meditating and trying to better understand what is happening. Yeah. Why is this the case? We're not generals in a war. Maybe that's a problem, or we should really sit down and be introspective about ourselves and talk to the Republic and say, look, you're going to need to do more here. We need to step back as generals because... But no, they don't. They just continue down that path. And I think until we were talking about this earlier today, and it didn't dawn on me that I don't even think it's a decline. I don't think it's even really a decline from the High Republic era to this. It's almost sort of a natural conclusion based on things we haven't actually learned about yet. They got them to a place. Sort of, they made a series of decisions over a period of time that allowed them to go one way, as opposed to continuing to thrive like they do during this High Republic era, which is really interesting that they're beginning to lose their connectivity to the Force. I mean, one of them is people. This is more of this is non-canon information, but it's pretty close. It comes mostly from the Plagueis, some from the Plagueis novel, and then also from the Tarkin novel. And then actually, no, I think it is canon because it is now mentioned again inside of the High Republic, so it is actually canon, is that the primary Jedi temple on Coruscant is built on top of an ancient Sith temple. And that's mentioned in the Plagueis novel. It's mentioned very heavily in the Tarkin novel. And then in the High Republic, in one of the first books, that's a chamber where they take certain items that only very few are ever allowed to go into. Only council members, whatever else. It's very secretive. They don't let people in there. But we learned later on that a lot, what you're led to believe later on in some of the books is that the Jedi's decline is likely because Sidious and others had been feeding into the dark side that never was really pushed away, that the Jedi thought they pushed away in this temple buried underneath the Jedi temple, that it was starting to seep up and corrupt the Jedi from basically within without them ever actually knowing about it, which I think is a interesting metaphor for probably a lot of things. But I'm with you that it'd be really interesting to see more on, but what would happen if they actually explored their own disconnection with the Force, or their lack of ability to connect with it and understand it as well. And it also makes you think, and I know I'm going to diatribe here, but it also makes me really think, Yoda, you've been alive for hundreds and hundreds of years, nearly 1,000 years by the time we see you in the Revenge of the Sith. How are you not noticing that your ability to connect with the Force and understand the Force is diminishing? I mean, you've been at this for a bit, man. How are you, of all creatures, not noticing that this is happening?
Yeah, it's one of these things too where if I could take a step back just from a storytelling perspective, this is a problem that I have with the prequels generally, which is I'm going to tell you what's going on instead of I'm going to show you what's going on. Now, the show is supposed to be, Well, how did the Jedi not realize that this clone army was being built? Well, it was because their powers in the Force have been diminished, and that's why. Like that's why they don't know that this clone army has been built, and in fact, what is it that Yoda says? If unaware of this clone army, blind are we in the Force or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's when you had the line from Mace Windu. And I guess my issue is that you got to kind of show that a little bit more. And I would have loved even there is a great sequence that is in the Force Awakens where uh, Kylo tries to pull the lightsaber to him and he can't, and it's because Rey is pulling the lightsaber as well at the exact same time, and it's in the snow, and he struggles with it for a second, and even the way that the lightsaber moves, and I've always loved that. I've always loved the way that the lightsaber moves in the snow in Empire Strikes Back.
Mm-hmm.
When Luke is using the Force in a perfunctory level, he's like using it like a tool. He even uses a lightsaber like a tool. Like he goes up on the AT-AT, he hits the thing to just open it up, puts the lightsaber back. He's just using the lightsaber like it was a blaster or something else. And he's very utilitarian even in his use of the Force. He's hanging upside down. He sees the by the way, this is showing and not telling. He sees the lightsaber in the snow, and he immediately reaches out for it, but not with the Force, with his hand, and realizes he can't reach it, and then reluctantly uses the Force, and it sits there, and it kind of like jitters a little bit in the snow. I've always thought that was like a cool effect, because that's a practical effect of it jittering, and then it jumps to his hand, and the way that you show someone being diminished is and like this happens in like with the T-1000 in the Terminator 2 movie. It's you literally show them not being able to do a thing that they naturally do all the time. And that also would help to explain, like, how did they kill all the Jedi? It's because they're just not as sharp as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you can easily do that by someone reaching out for something. Like in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan has to pull that little ball that's making the map in the room with the kids. When they're like they're doing lightsaber training, and Master Obi-Wan's lost a planet. How embarrassing! And he just leans back and he just grabs the little thing, the little data, whatever it is, sphere, and it pulls right back into his hand. And that also is an okay moment to let that sphere fall a bit, and to really show that as my powers aren't as strong as they should be, and you can or if you show them and they can't meditate. Even a line like Mace Windu interrupting Yoda and saying, "Are you still having trouble meditating?" Yes, I am. Like, these are really simple lines, and they go a long way to show their diminishing.
Yes.
And I think that if they did, you could see them suddenly. I feel like Jedis use the Force in a way that we might breathe or our heartbeats. It's all automatic, and so suddenly they can't pilot ships that well. Suddenly lightsabers aren't as easy for them to use. They can't see things before they happen, so they're even worse when it comes to the battles themselves. These are all things that would have been great to see.
It's interesting because there is a scene that is sort of the inverse of what you're describing, but accomplishes the same thing. But I just realized. So there's a scene where Obi-Wan fights Grievous, and when he finally beats Grievous, it's because he's hanging off a ledge. He pulls he force pulls a blaster to himself, shoots Grievous in the heart or his organ sac, and it burns up, and Grievous dies.
Yep.
And as he's walking towards Grievous, he looks at he's holding the blaster very naturally, like he's holding it not like somebody who doesn't really use these things. He's holding it like somebody for a moment or two that this is not an uncomfortable thing to do. And then he kind of looks at it and goes, "Ugh, so uncivilized."
So uncivilized.
And it made me think. You just made me think that is actually a really good indication of somebody who's like, "Wait, hold on. You look a little too comfy with this blaster. That's not your natural thing to use. And you had to make a show of saying, oh, this is totally uncivilized. But it accomplished what you needed to get accomplished. And then rather than showing Obi-Wan with some grief for taking a life, even though what he did was necessary. They've given Grievous every opportunity to turn back. He's destroying, doing all these bad things, etc. Jedi are still supposed to regret and feel bad about taking any life of any kind.
Yeah.
And he shows big, goose egg of there's zero regret. He even goes so far as to almost be pompous and say, oh, so uncivilized. And I feel like all of those little actions play into like, there's an arrogance here that, going back to your comment in previous videos of like Obi-Wan actually being a villain. But we'll leave that for another time.
Obi-Wan is like, the greatest villain in the Star Wars universe.
But that scene right there, it shows a level of arrogance that I don't think many people actually caught up on. You, because you probably think, oh, well, that's him complimenting his lightsaber. Like, I could have done so much better with this. You tried, though, homie. You had your lightsaber, and you didn't. And so you lost it. You don't have it anymore. It's not around you. You had to go find... Cody had to give it back to you after you finished that scene before you flew off. Cody actually found... Commander Cody was like, oh, by the way, you might want this. Oh, thanks, Cody. And then he rides up, and then 66 comes and whatever else. But, like, it's just so interesting that, like, dude, I think you're actually... I think that's a manifestation of like the level of arrogance and lack of understanding that you're not actually as connected to these things as you think you are.
No, I feel like the arrogance too. By the way, Obi-Wan chastises a part of the villain of Obi-Wan. Chastises Anakin for losing his lightsaber, and Obi-Wan's losing his lightsaber
really
left
crappy
and right.
fake beard at that time. Ugh.
Obi-Wan's losing his lightsaber like left and right. He loses it on Naboo, and that's why he's running away from the. That's why he's running away. And from the droid that's like chasing him down, and Qui-Gon's got to like bounce that laser bolt back. But yeah, he like chastises Anakin for losing his lightsaber. Immediately loses his lightsaber when he's fighting a dude that's got 4 lightsabers. The thing that I always thought was really funny though about that entire sequence is, in the Clone Wars cartoon by what is it, Getty Tarkovsky or
Yes.
Tarnovsky, Dooku's training Grievous, and he says, you can't really beat the Jedi, man, because you don't have the Force. And if you're going to go up against them, the only thing that you have to recognize, you need 2 things. You need basically quickness, and you need fear. And if they're afraid of you, they won't be able to beat you. And that is then recognized when Grievous is able to defeat like all these Jedi. It's because he gets them afraid. And that's another part of this whole, what if the Jedi lose their power? I like the idea of fear. Fear drains the Jedi. That fear is this thing that is, it's like an energy sink for them. And by the way, that's like right out of the source material of Dune, that fear is the mind killer. And a lot of who Muad'Dib is and Paul Atreides is in Luke Skywalker, and the weirding way could easily be the Force. But in all of that, fear is the mind killer. And that's the kind of stuff that I would have loved to have seen a little bit more of, which is if they are struggling in using the Force, that it's manifested as, wow, I can't beat Grievous suddenly. I'm tossing him around with the Force. I'm literally throwing him into that, whatever, the air conditioner that's hanging from the sky. And then Grievous falls down and then gets in his giant bicycle wheel and rolls away. But my point about that is that I would love it if it's like, why can't I beat this guy? I should be cleaning it up. He is a robot. That I, like, why can't I defeat this person? And then likewise, I would have loved to seen it as a manifestation of fear, because Obi-Wan is taken by Maul in episode 1 because he gets angry, and you see it, and you can tell that that's the direction that's been given to Ewan McGregor is, you're angry. You're angry, and when this door opens, when these laser walls open, you're gonna go at Maul with everything that you've got. And because you see him, he's like boxing,
Yeah.
he's like jumping around, he's like ready to go. The doors open, and boom, it is a great intense lightsaber fight that Obi-Wan loses because he's angry,
Yes.
and his focus falls, and so Maul's able to use that and knock him back over. And
It's the reason why Sith are so good at that. Like in that moment, so like, yeah, but
exactly.
like Maul has fear and anger and all that. Yeah, but the difference is he's trained to
Yeah.
use it. He has been
Yes.
trained not just to use it, but as we learned so many other times, the Sith train each other to duel with lightsabers. The Jedi do not. They do it in
No.
practice as part of forms, but they're essentially taught you're never going to need this because the Sith aren't around. We don't fight. It's almost it's almost performance at that point of dueling with
Yes.
somebody else. That's all they're really trained for. The Sith, they train to fight. They train to battle. The lightsabers an extension, and they train to channel all that anger and fear into a power, into what they do, and use it to their advantage. The Jedi don't, and they've stopped. They stopped doing it. Actually, it's even said in the High Republic era that while they do these demonstrations, that they're primarily for demonstration purposes. They don't duel. It's not a thing that they use the lightsabers for these days. Not since the last great Sith War, which is far in the past and they don't think about it anymore. And I think by the time of the Republic era, or the time that we're used to, that not old Republic type at the time that we're used to,
Yeah.
they've just forgotten that. Like
Twilight.
it's still the same, but they just don't think about it that way anymore. And that's, I think, a problem because they don't recognize that they don't actually know how to do this very well. They just assume, well, I learned how to use lightsabers, so I'm good, right? And they don't
Yeah.
consider that. It's interesting that you bring up the fear thing. And I didn't mean to like cut you off from what your
No,
thought
no,
was,
no,
but
no, no.
it made me think that with the fear conversation you were bringing up, that they what they don't recognize is that their loss of connection to the Force means that they no longer attribute a large portion of their own life force and their own guidance in the world and the living force to what the Force does for them. So they think too much about their own life and their own mortality. And previous eras of Jedi, like even the High Republic, don't. They do what's necessary. The thing is in front of them, they just go do it. And if they die, they die, and they know that they'll be part of the cosmic force, and then that's it. And it just happens. And there you go. They
Yeah.
kind of run with it. Not all of them, but they perform the duties that they need to perform because it needs to happen at that moment to save a life. Whereas in the public area that we're used to, that's not happening that way. They're thinking a little too much. In some cases it's a lot of thought. In others it's a split second. But they take time to think about it, which to your point, that's where fear comes in because they're not trained well enough to realize that you shouldn't be fearing losing or dying or winning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm,
should still just do whatever you need to do, and regardless of what the outcome is, you did what you needed to get done. That is your whole life being. That's what you're here for. But instead,
Yep.
they consider their mortality, which introduces fear and doubt, questioning, and all these other things, and ultimately means they end up, struggling or almost forcing their own disconnection with the Force at that point.
Yeah, this is one of these things where I by the way, like there's a great commercial that again, one of the terrible things about episode 1 is that Peter Serafinowicz's voice for Darth Maul is not used enough. There was a commercial where Darth Maul it's recorded. So it's Peter Serafinowicz's lines, and it was a part of the episode 1 theater campaign, and it's fear attracts the fearful, the strong, the weak, the innocent, the corrupt. Fear, and then it shows Darth Maul with his double-bladed lightsaber, and he says, "Fear is my ally." And that is such a great line, and it means everything to the Sith, and it really shows how you can diminish the Jedi. The thing that always bothered me about the Jedi, and this is where I think it's a risk about the whole "I'm going to become one with the Force." The Jedi have this almost prayer of St. Francis like ability to say that one thing is the other. For those who are not familiar with the prayer of St. Francis, it's like it is only in forgiving that that we are forgiven. It is only in giving that we receive. It's only in dying are we born to new life. It's this wonderful, backwards thing, and I love it. And the Jedi have kind of a similar thing. It's there is no death, there is only the Force. And I know that you've probably read these things too.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Sith have a creed and
Books,
the
both
Jedi
of
have
the
a
books
creed.
are in the house. Yep.
Yes, and they're opposite of one another. You know, there is no what is it for the Sith? It's that there isn't
Peace is a
the
lie.
Force. Yeah, peace is a lie. You know, the power is, you know, is essentially it. You know, passion. It's basically passion and power in the Force, and the Jedi are all about surrender. You know,
Here it is.
and I mean that in like an honest way, in
Here
the
it
way
is.
that like, yeah,
Peace is a lie. There's only passion. Through passion, I
yep,
gain strength. Through strength, I gain
yep,
power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me.
yes, yes. And that is a liberating. That is liberating to the individual. Liberation and surrendering are very different things. Liberation is to escape something, to go to something else. Surrendering is to give yourself to something. And the Jedi, in a way that you would see in a lot of religions, from Western, Eastern, multiple different religions through time, it's about surrendering yourself to a code or to a larger thing. And the Jedi are willing to surrender their lives to this bigger, to the Force. And that to me is a really interesting dichotomy, because the Jedi struggle at times, I think, to be an agent for the living. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but that's the truth. And what I mean by that is there is this great movie that I don't think anybody's seen. It came out like 2 years ago. It's got Robert Redford in it. It's got the one of the guys from How I Met Your Mother. It's got all Jesse Clemens, like all of these amazing actors in it. And it's called The Discovery. And it's about a guy that discovers Robert Redford is able to prove that there's an afterlife, and it causes a wave of people not knowing whether or not they want to live in this world or live in the next. And it's a wonderful story, and it's very poignant. It's not something that you're going to watch and like, hey, like let's get a pizza and watch The Discovery. It's a very like, it's a big movie. It's got a lot of ideas. It's very much like you're going to walk out of it in a very much like I remember my wife and I watched like Never Let Me Go, and then we were like bummed out for the rest of the evening, like after watching that. It's not a movie that you walk away with good feelings, but it's a movie that kind of symbolizes this struggle that the Jedi have, which is, do you live for one another or do you live for the Force? And I think that knowledge that they have, which is that they can surrender themselves to the Force, and some of them even thinking, and I will be immortal in the Force. I think that creates a certain amount of arrogance. And I think the man said it best in Return of the Jedi, which was, your overconfidence is your weakness.
I
And
Your statement a second ago, I
yeah,
think is the key point. There is, I will become immortal. I will become immortal when I become part of the cosmic force. That's the statement right there. It's like, that's the arrogance. You will become
yeah,
immortal. Like, why does it
yeah,
matter? Like it's not, you aren't becoming anything other than a part of the cosmic force. You, at that point, your being goes back into the cosmic force, and that's it. Like, you shouldn't, if you were trained properly the way your code aspires to, is to not care about that and let go of that, because whenever it happens, it just happens, and you shouldn't want for any more. The problem with that is that that's next to impossible for any sentient being to ever actually attain, because why would any sentient being that's aware of its own mortality ever be okay with not being around anymore? Like,
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
struggle that every being who lives likely is going to feel some sort of like, yeah, but I don't necessarily want to die. Like, I want to do all these things, but there's a little thing back here. It's like, I don't actually want to die. Like, that's not a thing I want. And they're like, the Jedi often say like, well, no one, we're not wanting to die, but we're trying to train ourselves to not focus on that and focus on the living in front of us. But to your point, I think that's also the problem, is that and this is why so many people see them as arrogant or disconnected or unconcerned or unemotional. not passionate, whatever the phrases happen to be, is because what they see is that while Jedi will protect all this life, if once a life is no longer here, they kind of don't worry about it anymore. And when you think about it from their perspective, they're like, I'm not going to let myself be consumed with a life that is no longer lived as part of the living force. It's now part of the cosmic force. It's gone on to a greater thing. Okay, that's very existential of you, and that's okay. But from a person or creature that is still alive, it's like, yeah, but that was my wife, or that was my kid, or my family member. Like, it sucks that they're gone, and you're acting like, okay, well, it's just done. It's like, no. I'm not as disconnected from their life as you are, and I think that people see that as either arrogant or disconnected. Whereas the Sith, they fully embrace passions. They fully embrace that we have passions, and they can lead us to things. What's interesting, though, is it comes back to, like, there's got to be the middle ground is probably far more of what creatures should actually like strive for, to find a balance of some, or strive to always find a balance between those things.
A balance of the force, maybe.
I'm just saying. I'm just gonna put it out there.
I think that you've like hit on it. Like, I by the way, I always thought that it was really contradictory. Like, the Jedi are like, my favorite understanding of the Jedi comes from Empire Strikes Back, where Yoda does this like moment where Luke is like, it's too big, like I can't move that thing, and Yoda's like, judge me by my size. No, you shouldn't, because the Force is my ally. And life creates it, helps it grow. And when he says to Luke, and he grabs his like physicality, and he kind of pinches it, and he says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. And he's talking about how we're all connected. And that's this idea of the Jedi and the Force that I like, is that the Jedi are the thing that's trying to keep the balance. Or at least at that point, that's all that Yoda cares about. It seems counterintuitive, though, to be like, oh yeah, hey, Obi-Wan, a friend of ours has figured out a way to keep his personality or his individuality in the Force. And it's like the Jedi we're constantly being told, it's not that the Jedi aren't forbidden to love, it's that the Jedi are told to not have possessions, that they aren't supposed to, that they aren't forbidden to love, they're in fact encouraged to love. It's just that they can't own anything or possess anything or care too much about things. Like, even Yoda says to Anakin, oh yeah, if you know people that have died, like, miss them do not, mourn them do not, they're with the Force now. And again, it's like, yeah, I guess my problem is he's like saying all that while at the same time telling Obi-Wan, by the way, all those dummies they're now drops in the ocean. I can teach you how to remain the drop. And that's, it's
very
weird.
selfish. It's a very selfish.
Yes.
Like, it's highly selfish. I just realized we've been going for an hour, and I think we have a lot more to talk about. So we should probably come back to this what happens when series. Yes. That would be fantastic, because I want to keep talking about this. But we should probably call it for tonight, because
you're right.
I think this is a good place to probably put a pin in that. But we are definitely coming back to this for sure. Awesome, dude. This has been good. I'll hit let's see if it works this time. I got it set up earlier. Boom, it worked. Awesome.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to try to get right there.
Yeah, right. Oh, here it is. Mash the subscribe. Yeah. So please subscribe. Hopefully you're still watching this far. We'd really appreciate it. I'll do it a little bit earlier next time. Hit the subscribe button. We love it. Thumbs up would be fantastic. Yep. We want to grow the channel so we can get out there a little bit more. And I promise we'll do a little bit better next week about getting the topic out earlier and conversation started earlier. It's been a busy week for the two of us, but that's okay. Well, you know what? It's all good. We'll get there. We do this. We don't do this just for the likes, but we do like the likes.
Yes, we do like the like.
Right on, dude. Anyway, anything we want to wrap up with before we go?
No, just we're always interested in ideas for topics. If you've got something, leave it in the comments. And then we're always so excited to put on this show, but it's great when we're engaging with the people that love this stuff as much as we do. And if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, let us know. But yeah, absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy. All right, everybody, have a good night. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Bye, everybody.